Hello. So this week we're going to be going over the basics of making chainmail in sheets like this. We're going to be looking at increasing and decreasing, as well as stabilizing our edges on the decreased sections. I am going to apologize now for any background noise you may hear. There's been some planes going, as well as neighbors making noise and all of that today. Plus, I live near a major road, so sometimes you hear traffic. So many apologies now ahead of time for that. For this, and this is not actually a finished project, this is the start of another project that I am working on, but I wanted to show how to weave with the scales. For this, I am using large scales. These are actually ordered from the Ring Lord. They are discounted because they're only anodized on one side. Usually there'll be anodization on both sides if you're using anodized scales. These are not premium scales. Premium scales would have all of the edges also anodized. This is a size large, and for the large scales, they use 16 standard wire gauge, 5/16 of an inch inner diameter rings for putting them together. When deciding which ring size to use for your scales, generally wherever you are buying your scales from should tell you what the ideal ring size is. And sometimes there's a little bit of flexibility, like if you want everything pulled in a little bit tighter, use a smidge smaller ring. If you want everything a little bit looser, use a ring that's a smidge larger. Slide that over. Now, when looking at scales, generally, they're going to have a bit of a bend in them. The front of the scale is the part where it is convex, or the doming is coming toward you, and the back is concave. So we have our scales, we have our rings, also 2 pairs of pliers. There are going to be links down below, as always. And to get started, I'm going to take, as we are doing this section here, first we're going to take our scale that we want to be the top center, put it on a ring, and then put our next scale facing the opposite direction, and then close. And then we're going to separate our 2 scales, and the way that they will be laying is like this once we reach that point, but it's going to be it's going to look like a bit of a mess for a bit. Now I'm going to take that same front center scale, put another ring through it, put another scale again so that they are facing opposite directions on the ring, and close. Now at this point, if I'm holding that center ring, the other 2 kind of fall down behind it. And this is where things start to get a little messy. Now, as I get ready to continue, this is the way that I personally choose to weave scales. There are other ways of doing this. If you look at other tutorials, there are a lot of people who will make little clusters of 4 and then put those together. My preference is to do a row at a time. But we have 1, then 2. Our next row is going to be 3. So I'm going to take another scale and a ring, and I'm going to be starting on this side. I'm going to put my ring in, and then here I'm going to put this scale facing the same direction as all of the others, and then close. my next one. So it's going to be that middle one that sits behind our top center and down. I'm going to take ring, put it into that same scale that I had just attached this one to. And this time I'm going to add this scale facing in this direction. Again, apologies for the jet noise. So that one is now face up. Going to take another ring and into the other scale in the row of 2. I'm going to flip this one over onto that open ring and close. So now this is our current setup. Another ring, one more scale for this row. Again, going to put it face up. And then finish that row by flipping it out. Like I said before, this is where things are a little bit messy. Trying to keep the most recent row of scales sitting on top helps with counting, or you can count 1, 2, 3 for the rows with what we're doing, making the little diamond of scales. Our next row is going to be 4 scales. First scale of the row goes facing the same way as everything else because there's nothing for it to flip onto. Slid all over the place. That ring is not closed very well. This is our 3rd scale in this row. And our 4th scale in this row. Now, something to keep in mind or to notice, perhaps, when you are weaving scales, is we are essentially doing the European 4-in-1. You look, we have, if you count the scales punched out whole as if it is a closed ring, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 rings going into it. So we are just weaving European 4-in-1. It is a lot simpler than it can sometimes feel when you first start, especially when you have rings splaying out like you keep seeing happen for me. Our next row is 5 scales. And after this, we are going to begin decreasing, because in the case of this particular project, I am starting it with small diamonds of scales that are 5 across at their widest. And not shown on camera because it is a bit of a mess, is I have a pile of pre-opened rings off to the side, so that I can just go when I'm ready to work with scales. I literally will just sit and prep, pre-open a whole bunch of rings, although I do also have a box where I have pre-closed rings because I do a lot of work with this size in particular. And now, because we have our row of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're going to decrease. So our next row is only going to have 4 scales in it. So we will be skipping this first scale here, and starting with what normally in an increase row would have been the second scale. Two. Scale 3. And you can see here where one of the scales that's back a row kind of wants to sit up on top of the others, but you can tell that that row is complete because it has 4 rings in it. So we want to bring the ones that only have 2 rings up on top. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Apologies again for the jet noise. I have no control over it. You'll notice that the scales on the edge are all flaying out quite a bit. We will deal with that in a couple minutes once we are done putting all of the scales on. With a piece this small, I prefer to do the stabilizing all at the end. If this were a much larger piece, I would be doing it every couple of rows. Again, just for the sake of demonstration, pulling all of those forward. 2 more scales in the next row. Then our last one. So there is all of our scale weaving completed, with the bottom or the outermost scales in the decrease going in all of the directions. So now my next step is for stabilizing. I am going to add an additional ring with nothing else to every one of these outer scales. And in the case of these ones that have 3 in them already, I want it to be what will be the bottom corner of 4. And then that bottommost scale that's all by itself is getting the same thing, but it's 2 bottom rings instead of just 1 because it needs 1 for either side. That particular scale was not ring was not lining up correctly when closed, so I removed it. And here comes another jet. that's all of our outermost decrease scales with an extra ring on them. Now the final step for the stabilization is we're going to take another open ring, go through, on this scale it's the one loose ring, and then through both of those on the next scale down. So that it is now 3 in 1 because it is the edge, so it doesn't have that bottom corner. Next one, into the ring that we added a minute ago, into both of those. And you don't have to do this step with the stabilizing, but it does make that those bottom edges hang a little bit more nicely, a little bit more neatly. So that's one side done. And you can see that those are behaving much more nicely than this side now. Apologies if I went off camera. I'm gonna go for the lower scale in the arrangement. We're gonna go into the bottom ring and the top ring, and on the upper scale in this arrangement we're just going to go into the bottom ring on the other side. And with that, the edges are all stabilized. Okay. Now, flip it over, have a reveal of what the other side looks like, which is especially dramatic with these only being anodized on one side. And another thing you can do is to add a little bit more to the top. You can actually just double up that ring. From here, you can expand in a number of ways. In the future, we'll go over how to do a more squared off piece, but for now I wanted to just focus on doing those increases and decreases because it's a little bit more fiddly to do a squared off top. So we did something a little bit simpler this time. If you have enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe. Like I said before, links to materials are in the description, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. Have a good one.